Girl disappeared for 16 years. Guard finally finds this on rural highway. Highway Patrol Officer Michael Chen pulled his cruiser to the shoulder of Route 47, responding to a call about suspicious activity at an abandoned farmhouse. The weathered structure sat 50 yards back from the asphalt, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. It was March 15, 2012, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown property. Chen had been patrolling this stretch of rural Missouri highway for 8 years. He knew every landmark, every pothole, every abandoned building along the route. The Whitmore farmhouse had been empty since old Harold Whitmore died in 2003, his heirs wanting nothing to do with the crumbling property. The anonymous caller reported seeing lights inside the house the previous night. Probably teenagers looking for a party spot, Chen figured. He grabbed his flashlight and radio, then walked up the dirt path toward the front door. The porch steps groaned under his weight. The front door hung partially open, its hinges rusted. Chen pushed it wider with his boot and stepped inside. Dust particles danced in the beam of his flashlight as he swept it across the interior. The living room held the remnants of furniture covered in white sheets. Mouse droppings littered the floor. Everything seemed normal for an abandoned house, until Chen noticed something odd in the corner. Fresh footprints in the dust led toward a hallway. Following the prints, Chen moved deeper into the house. The hallway was narrow and dark. 3 doorways branched off from it. The first led to a kitchen, the second to what looked like a bedroom. The third door was closed. Chen tried the handle. Locked. That was unusual. Why would someone lock a door in an abandoned house? He examined the lock more closely with his flashlight. It was new. The brass gleamed, unlike the tarnished hardware elsewhere in the house. "Police?" he called out. "Anyone in there?" Silence. Chen pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need backup at the Whitmore place on Route 47, mile marker 23. Possible breaking and entering situation." While waiting for backup, Chen walked around to the back of the house. A basement window had been recently disturbed. Fresh dirt was scattered around its frame. He knelt down and peered inside. His flashlight beam revealed a basement that had been cleaned out. Unlike the rest of the house, this area showed signs of recent use. Deputy Rebecca Martinez arrived 20 minutes later. She was Chen's regular backup, a thorough investigator with 15 years of experience. "What do you have, Mike?" she asked, pulling on latex gloves. "Locked door upstairs, disturbed basement window, and signs someone's been using this place recently." The caller said they saw lights last night. They returned to the house together. Martinez examined the locked door while Chen checked the other rooms more thoroughly. In the kitchen, they found evidence of recent activity. Empty food cans in the trash, a camping stove on the counter, and sleeping bags rolled up in the corner. "Someone's definitely been staying here," Martinez said. "But why lock just one room?" Chen pulled out his phone and called for additional units. "I think we need to get this door open. Something doesn't feel right." Officer David Park arrived with a crowbar 30 minutes later. The 3 officers positioned themselves around the locked door. Park wedged the crowbar into the frame and applied pressure. The lock mechanism gave way with a sharp crack. The door swung open to reveal a small bedroom. Chen's flashlight illuminated what appeared to be a makeshift shrine. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes. In the center of the room sat a wooden table with several items arranged on its surface. Martinez stepped closer to examine the display. "Mike, you need to see this." On the table lay a child's backpack, faded and worn. Next to it was a school identification card in a plastic sleeve. Martinez picked up the card and read the name aloud. Sarah Elizabeth Hawkins, Lincoln Elementary School, 1995-1996. Chen felt his stomach tighten. That name was familiar. He'd heard it during his rookie training sessions. Sarah Hawkins was the 12-year-old girl who disappeared from Springfield in August 1996. Her case had gone cold after 18 months of intensive investigation. "Get the crime scene unit out here immediately," Chen told Martinez, "and contact Detective Laura Sullivan at Springfield PD. If she's still on the force, she'll want to know about this." Martinez was already photographing everything with her phone. "Look at these newspaper clippings. They're all about Sarah's disappearance. Some of these articles are from 1996 and 1997. Chen examined the walls more carefully. The clippings were arranged chronologically, creating a timeline of the original investigation. Photos of search parties, interviews with Sarah's family, and police statements were meticulously organized. "This isn't random," Chen said. "Someone's been following this case for years." In the corner of the room, Park discovered a metal filing cabinet. The top drawer was unlocked and contained manila folders labeled with dates. Each folder held more newspaper clippings, printed internet articles, and handwritten notes about the investigation. "There's something else down here," Park called from near the floor. He was examining the baseboards with his flashlight. "Looks like loose floorboards." Chen knelt beside him. 3 floorboards in the corner showed signs of being removed repeatedly. The nails were new, but the wood around them was scarred from multiple installations. "Should we pull these up?" Park asked. "Not until crime scene gets here," Chen replied. "But mark the location. This whole room needs to be processed properly." Martinez continued photographing while Chen called Detective Sullivan. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He left a detailed message explaining the discovery and requested immediate contact. The crime scene unit arrived 2 hours later. Technician Amanda Foster began processing the room systematically, starting with fingerprints on all surfaces. Photographer James Wong documented every angle of the shrine-like display. "This is elaborate," Foster commented as she worked. "Whoever set this up spent considerable time and effort. These newspaper clippings are in excellent condition for being 16 years old." Wong focused his camera on the handwritten notes scattered among the clippings. "Some of this writing looks fresh. Check the dates on these notes." Chen examined the notes Wong indicated. Several were dated within the last 6 months. The handwriting was neat and methodical, with detailed observations about the original investigation. "Someone's been actively working on this case recently," Chen said. "This isn't just an old obsession." Foster finished dusting for prints and moved to the filing cabinet. Each folder contained dozens of documents, some photocopied from official sources, others printed from internet searches about the case. "There's a folder here marked New Evidence," Foster reported. "It contains photos that don't look like newspaper clippings. These appear to be personal photographs." Chen looked at the photos Foster held up. They showed various locations around Springfield and the surrounding area. Some were marked with red X's. Others had question marks written in the margins. "We need to get these to Springfield PD immediately," Chen said. "And we still haven't checked under those loose floorboards." Foster carefully photographed the floor area before Park began removing the boards. Underneath, they found a small wooden box wrapped in plastic. Foster lifted it out and placed it on the table. Inside the box were more personal items: a child's bracelet, a small diary with a lock, and what appeared to be a piece of clothing. A yellow T-shirt with a cartoon character on the front. "These look like they could belong to Sarah Hawkins," Martinez said quietly. Chen's radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, this is Detective Sullivan returning your call. I'm en route to your location. Do not disturb anything else until I arrive." "Copy that, Detective. Crime scene is already processing the location." Foster continued her methodical examination while they waited. The diary in the box was locked, but through the plastic evidence bag, they could see childish handwriting on the visible pages. "This could be crucial evidence," Foster said. "If these are Sarah's personal items, they might tell us what happened to her." 20 minutes later, Detective Laura Sullivan arrived at the scene. Chen recognized her immediately from her reputation. She was a veteran investigator in her mid-50s, known for her relentless pursuit of cold cases. "Show me what you found," Sullivan said without preamble. Chen walked her through the discovery, from the initial call about lights in the house to the current evidence processing. Sullivan examined each item carefully, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. "I've been working Sarah's case for 16 years, she said. "Her parents call me every few months asking for updates. I never had anything to tell them." She picked up the school identification card and studied it closely. "This is definitely Sarah's. I remember this photo from the original investigation." Sullivan opened one of the manila folders and scanned the contents. "Whoever compiled this has access to information that wasn't released to the public. Some of these details were kept confidential." "What does that mean?" Chen asked. It means our person of interest either has law enforcement connections or was directly involved in the original case. Foster held up the wooden box containing the personal items. Detective, we need to determine if these belong to Sarah. The diary especially might contain important information. Sullivan nodded. I'll have everything transported to our lab for analysis. Sarah's parents will need to identify these items, but I want preliminary testing done first. She turned to Chen. Good work, officer. This could be the break we've been waiting for. After 16 years, we might finally have answers about what happened to Sarah Hawkins. As the sun set over the abandoned farmhouse, the investigation team continued processing the scene. The discovery had transformed a routine patrol call into potentially the most significant development in one of Springfield's most notorious unsolved cases. The original investigation detective Sullivan drove back to Springfield that evening with copies of everything found at the Whitmore farmhouse. Her first stop was the police department's evidence storage facility, where Sarah Hawkins' case files occupied an entire cabinet drawer. She pulled the original investigation folder and spread its contents across her desk. The photos from 1996 showed a smiling 12-year-old girl with blonde hair and green eyes. Sarah had been walking home from her friend Jessica Martinez's house on August 15, 1996, when she vanished without a trace. The original timeline showed Sarah left Jessica's house at 6:30 p.m. The walk to her own home on Maple Street should have taken 15 minutes. When Sarah didn't arrive by 7 p.m., her mother Linda called Jessica's parents. That call launched an investigation that consumed Springfield's police resources for 18 months. Sullivan found the witness statements from that evening. Mrs. Eleanor Davies, who lived on Oak Street, reported seeing a girl matching Sarah's description talking to someone in a dark sedan around 6:45 p.m. Davies couldn't see the driver clearly but described the car as possibly a Buick or Oldsmobile from the late 1980s. The original detective assigned to the case was Robert Harrison, who retired in 2008. Sullivan called him at home. "Bob, it's Laura Sullivan. We may have found something related to the Sarah Hawkins case." Harrison's voice sharpened. "Sarah Hawkins? That case kept me awake for years. What did you find?" Sullivan described the farmhouse discovery. Harrison listened without interruption until she finished. "The Whitmore place," he said slowly. "We searched that property during the original investigation. Harold Whitmore gave us full cooperation. We went through every building, every shed, even used cadaver dogs in the fields." When was that search conducted?" "September 1996, about 3 weeks after Sarah disappeared. Whitmore was adamant that we check his property. Said he wanted to help find her." Sullivan made notes as Harrison spoke. "What was your impression of Whitmore?" "He seemed genuinely concerned. Offered to help with the search parties. He was probably in his 70s then. Lived alone since his wife died. The property was already showing signs of neglect. Did you ever consider him a suspect?" Harrison paused. "Everyone was a suspect initially, but Harold had an alibi for the time of Sarah's disappearance. He was at the hospital visiting his brother who'd had surgery. We verified that with hospital records and his brother's family." Sullivan thanked Harrison and hung up. She turned her attention to the evidence from the farmhouse, comparing the items to the original case file. The backpack found at the scene matched the description given by Sarah's parents in 1996. It was a blue JanSport, with decorative patches Sarah had sewn on herself. The school identification card was legitimate. Sullivan found the corresponding entry in Lincoln Elementary's records. The yellow T-shirt presented more questions. According to the original investigation, Sarah was last seen wearing a pink blouse and blue jeans. No yellow shirt was mentioned in any witness statements or family interviews. Sullivan decided to visit Sarah's parents before proceeding further. Linda and Richard Hawkins still lived in the same house on Maple Street, where they'd waited for their daughter to return 16 years ago. Linda Hawkins answered the door, her face showing the wear of years spent hoping for news about her missing daughter. At 62, she maintained the dining room table where she'd organized search efforts in 1996 and 1997. "Mrs. Hawkins, I'm Detective Sullivan. I called earlier about some items we found that might be related to Sarah's case." Linda led her to the living room, where Richard was waiting. He was a quiet man who worked construction, now mostly retired due to arthritis. Both parents had aged visibly in the years since their daughter's disappearance. Sullivan showed them photographs of the items found at the farmhouse. Linda immediately recognized the backpack and school ID card. "That's definitely Sarah's backpack," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "She was so proud of those patches. We bought them at the craft store, and she spent hours figuring out where to put each one." Richard studied the photos carefully. "The school ID is hers too. Where did you find these things?" Sullivan explained about the farmhouse without revealing all the details. She showed them the photograph of the yellow t-shirt. "I don't recognize that shirt," Linda said. "Sarah didn't own anything like that. She preferred pink and purple clothes." "Could it have belonged to a friend? Something she borrowed?" Linda shook her head. "Sarah was particular about her clothes. She wouldn't borrow something that color." Sullivan made careful notes. The unknown t-shirt suggested Sarah might have been held somewhere before whatever happened to her occurred. "There's something else," Sullivan said gently. "We found a small diary. It's locked, and we haven't opened it yet. Do you remember Sarah keeping a diary?" "Yes," Linda said immediately. "She got it for her birthday in May 1996. It was pink with a little gold lock. She wrote in it every night before bed." Richard leaned forward. "Is that the diary you found?" Sullivan checked her notes. "The one we found is blue with a silver lock." "That's not Sarah's," Linda said firmly. "Her diary was definitely pink. She showed it to me several times." This discrepancy troubled Sullivan. If the blue diary didn't belong to Sarah, whose was it? And why was it stored with Sarah's personal items? She continued interviewing the Hawkins family about the original investigation. They expressed frustration with the lack of progress over the years, but maintained hope that Sarah might still be alive somewhere. "We never gave up believing she might come home," Richard said. "Every time the phone rings, every knock on the door, we wonder if it's news about Sarah." Sullivan left the Hawkins house with more questions than answers. Back at the police station, she contacted the crime lab about processing the diary found at the farmhouse. Lab technician Maria Santos called back within 2 hours. "Detective, I've got preliminary results on that diary. The handwriting analysis shows it was written by someone in their early teens, probably female. But here's the interesting part. Some of the entries are dated after August 15, 1996. After Sarah disappeared? Correct. The latest entry I can see without opening the lock is dated September 3, 1996. That's almost 3 weeks after her disappearance." Sullivan felt her pulse quicken. "Can you tell me anything else without opening it?" "Sure. The visible portions mention being scared and wanting to go home. There are references to someone named Mr. J, who seems to be controlling the situation." "How soon can you get it open and processed?" "Give me until tomorrow morning. I want to photograph everything before we break the lock." That evening, Sullivan reviewed the original case files again. She made a list of everyone interviewed during the initial investigation, cross-referencing names with the current findings. Harold Whitmore had died in 2003, but she could interview his surviving relatives. Mrs. Eleanor Davies, the witness who saw Sarah talking to someone in a dark sedan, was still alive and living in a retirement community. Sullivan also noted that the original investigation had focused heavily on stranger abduction theories. The discovery at the farmhouse suggested someone with local knowledge and long-term access to the property might be involved. She called Officer Chen to coordinate next steps. "Mike, I need you to interview the neighbors around the Whitmore place. Find out if anyone noticed unusual activity over the years, especially vehicles coming and going." "Already started on that, Detective. Most of the neighbors didn't notice anything, but there's one interesting lead. A farmer named Tom Bradley owns the property adjacent to the Whitmore place. He says he saw lights in the house several times over the past 5 years. Did he report it?" "No, he figured it was Harold's relatives checking on the property. But he said it always happened at night, and the vehicles never stayed long." Sullivan added this information to her growing file. The investigation was revealing a complex pattern of activity at the farmhouse long after Harold Whitmore's death. The next morning, Maria Santos called with results from the diary analysis. "Detective, you need to see this. We've got the diary open, and the contents are disturbing." Sullivan rushed to the crime lab. Santos had photographed each page of the diary and compiled them into a comprehensive report. The diary contains entries from someone who was definitely being held against their will, Santos explained. The handwriting matches what we'd expect from a 12-year-old girl, and several entries specifically mention missing home and family. She showed Sullivan key passages. The entries described being kept in a basement room, receiving food irregularly, and being threatened by someone called Mr. J not to try to escape. There's more, Santos continued. Some entries mention another person, someone called the girl upstairs. This suggests our victim wasn't alone. Sullivan studied the diary entries carefully. The final entry, dated September 3, 1996, was particularly chilling. Mr. J says we have to move again. The girl upstairs won't stop crying. I'm scared something bad is going to happen. And, Maria, can you determine if this handwriting matches any samples from Sarah Hawkins? We don't have handwriting samples from Sarah in the original case file, but I can compare this to school records if the family has any. Sullivan called Linda Hawkins immediately. Mrs. Hawkins, this is Detective Sullivan. I need to ask if you have any samples of Sarah's handwriting from around 1996. I have her school notebooks and some letters she wrote to her grandmother. Why do you need them? We found a diary that might be connected to Sarah's case. I need to verify the handwriting. Linda agreed to bring the samples to the police station that afternoon. Meanwhile, Sullivan continued analyzing the diary contents with Santos. The entries painted a picture of two young girls being held in different locations within the same building. The basement room was described as cold and damp, with a small window that was always covered. Food came sporadically, and there was limited access to bathroom facilities. This describes a kidnapping and imprisonment scenario, Sullivan said. If this diary belongs to Sarah, it changes everything about our understanding of what happened to her. Santos nodded grimly. The psychological trauma described in these entries is consistent with prolonged captivity. Whoever wrote this was experiencing severe stress and fear. When Linda Hawkins arrived with Sarah's school notebooks, Santos immediately began comparing handwriting samples. The analysis took several hours, but the results were conclusive. Detective, this is definitely Sarah's handwriting, Santos reported. The letter formations, spacing, and pressure patterns are identical. Sarah Hawkins wrote this diary while being held captive. Sullivan felt the weight of 16 years of investigation shifting. Sarah hadn't simply vanished. She'd been kidnapped and held prisoner. The diary provided the first direct evidence of what happened to her after August 15, 1996. But many questions remained unanswered. Who was Mr. J? What happened after September 3, 1996? And most importantly, where was Sarah now? The investigation had taken a dramatic turn, transforming from a cold missing persons case into an active kidnapping investigation with evidence of prolonged captivity and possible multiple victims. Expanding the investigation, Detective Sullivan assembled a task force the following morning. The discovery of Sarah's diary had elevated the case to the highest priority level. Captain James Morrison assigned 3 additional detectives and 2 crime scene specialists to work exclusively on the investigation. Sullivan began by creating a comprehensive timeline on the conference room whiteboard. August 15, 1996 marked Sarah's disappearance. The diary entries spanned from August 16 through September 3, providing an 18-day window of documented captivity. Our immediate priority is identifying Mr. J, Sullivan told the task force. Sarah's diary mentions this person consistently as her captor. We need to cross-reference the original investigation files for anyone with the initial J. Detective Mark Rodriguez volunteered to handle this assignment. He was a methodical investigator with experience in pattern analysis. Within 2 hours, he'd compiled a list of 17 people with J names who were interviewed during the original investigation. Most of these are routine witnesses, Rodriguez reported, but 3 stand out as worth re-investigating. The first was James Patterson, Sarah's elementary school janitor in 1996. He'd been questioned because he had access to student information and knew Sarah's routine. The original investigation cleared him based on an alibi, but his whereabouts during late August 1996 deserved another look. The second was Jeremy Walsh, a neighbor who lived 2 blocks from Sarah's house. He'd been 18 in 1996 and had a summer job that required him to drive through Sarah's neighborhood regularly. The original interview noted he seemed nervous but cooperative. The third was Jonathan Reeves, Harold Whitmore's nephew who occasionally helped maintain the farmhouse property. He lived in Kansas City, but visited the farm several times per year to check on his uncle. Sullivan assigned different detectives to locate and re-interview each of these individuals. Meanwhile, she returned to the Whitmore farmhouse with the crime scene team to search for additional evidence. The basement of the farmhouse had been thoroughly cleaned, but crime scene specialist David Kim found traces of recent human habitation. Minute fabric fibers were embedded in wooden floorboards, and chemical analysis revealed residue from cleaning products that hadn't been available in 1996. Someone definitely used this basement within the last few years, Kim reported. The cleaning was professional grade, designed to eliminate biological evidence. Sullivan examined the basement layout. The room Sarah described in her diary matched the physical characteristics of this space. Small windows, concrete walls, and limited access points created an ideal prison environment. Check for any hidden compartments or storage areas, Sullivan instructed. If Sarah was held here for 18 days, there might be additional evidence we haven't found. Kim discovered a loose stone in the foundation wall. Behind it was a small cavity containing a plastic bag. Inside the bag were more personal items: hair ties, a small toy, and a note written in different handwriting than Sarah's diary. The note was brief, but significant. If something happens to me, look for the other girl. She's in the upstairs room. Mr. J keeps us separated, but I hear her crying at night. My name is Amy Chen. I'm 13 years old from Jefferson City. Sullivan felt her stomach drop. The diary's reference to the girl upstairs wasn't metaphorical. There had been another victim, possibly held simultaneously with Sarah. She immediately contacted the Missouri State Police to search for missing persons reports involving Amy Chen from Jefferson City. The response came within an hour. Amy Chen had been reported missing on July 22, 1996, 3 weeks before Sarah's disappearance. We're looking at a serial kidnapper, Sullivan told her task force. Someone was systematically abducting young girls and holding them at the Whitmore farmhouse. Detective Rodriguez had located James Patterson, the former school janitor. Patterson, now 58, worked as a maintenance supervisor at a shopping mall in Springfield. When Rodriguez arrived at his workplace, Patterson agreed to be interviewed immediately. I remember Sarah Hawkins, Patterson said. Sweet kid, always polite when she saw me in the hallways. I was shocked when she went missing. Rodriguez asked about Patterson's activities during late August and early September 1996. Patterson produced old work schedules showing he'd worked overtime hours during that period because of summer maintenance projects. I was painting classrooms and replacing floor tiles, Patterson explained. The school has records of my time clock entries if you need to verify. Rodriguez followed up at Lincoln Elementary School. The 1996 maintenance records confirmed Patterson had worked long shifts during the time frame when Sarah was being held captive. Multiple witnesses placed him at the school during hours when the diary entries were being written. Detective Sarah Martinez had better luck with Jeremy Walsh. Now 34 and working as an insurance adjuster, Walsh lived in Springfield with his wife and 2 children. When Martinez contacted him, Walsh immediately became defensive. I already talked to police about that girl back in 1996, Walsh said. I didn't have anything to do with her disappearance. We're just following up on some new evidence, Martinez explained. Can you tell me about your activities during late August and early September 1996? Walsh claimed he'd been working his summer job delivering supplies to construction sites. But when Martinez asked for specific details, Walsh's story became inconsistent. I don't remember exact dates from 16 years ago, Walsh said. I just drove around delivering stuff. Martinez requested Walsh's employment records from 1996. The construction company had been sold twice since then, but she eventually located archived payroll records. Walsh had been paid for only 3 days of work during the entire month of September 1996. Mr. Walsh, these records show you barely worked in September 1996. Where were you during that time? Walsh became increasingly agitated. I might have been sick or something. I don't remember every detail from high school. Martinez scheduled a formal interview at the police station. Walsh's inconsistent statements and defensive behavior warranted closer examination. Detective Tom Bradley was investigating Jonathan Reeves, Harold Whitmore's nephew. Reeves, now 45, worked as an accountant in Kansas City. When Bradley contacted him by phone, Reeves expressed surprise about renewed interest in the farmhouse. "I haven't been to Uncle Harold's place since his funeral in 2003, Reeves said. "After he died, the family decided to let the property go. Nobody wanted to maintain it." Bradley asked about Reeves's visits to the farmhouse during the 1990s. Reeves described helping with basic maintenance, mowing grass, checking the well pump, and winterizing the buildings. "How often did you visit during 1996? Reeves paused before answering. "Probably 3 or 4 times that year. Uncle Harold was getting older and couldn't handle all the maintenance himself." "Do you remember specific dates?" "Not exactly, but I usually came down on weekends when I could get away from work." Bradley requested Reeves' employment records to verify his work schedule during 1996. He also asked Reeves to provide a list of anyone else who had access to the farmhouse property. "Uncle Harold sometimes hired local kids to help with heavy work," Reeves said. "I don't remember their names, but he kept records of who he paid for odd jobs." This information prompted Sullivan to search Harold Whitmore's estate records. His personal papers had been donated to the Springfield Historical Society after his death, but financial records might still exist. The Historical Society had boxes of Whitmore's documents stored in their archive. Sullivan found checkbook registers and receipt books dating back to the 1990s. Whitmore had indeed paid several local teenagers for yard work and maintenance help. One name appeared frequently in the records: Jeremy Walsh. Between 1994 and 1996, Whitmore had written 12 checks to Walsh for various projects around the farmhouse. Sullivan immediately called Detective Martinez with this information. Walsh had lied about his connection to the Whitmore property. He'd worked there regularly during the period when Sarah and Amy were being held captive. "Bring Walsh in immediately," Sullivan ordered. "He's got access to the crime scene, and he's been lying about his involvement." Martinez and 2 officers arrested Walsh at his office that afternoon. Walsh became hostile when confronted with the evidence of his work at the Whitmore farmhouse. "So what if I worked for the old man? That doesn't mean I kidnapped anybody." During the formal interrogation, Walsh's story continued to change. He initially denied being at the farmhouse during August and September 1996, then admitted he might have done some work there but couldn't remember specific dates. "Jeremy, we have Harold Whitmore's check records," Sullivan said during the interview. "He paid you for work on August 20th and September 10th, 1996. Sarah Hawkins was being held captive during that exact time frame." Walsh requested a lawyer and refused to answer further questions, but his connection to the crime scene during the relevant dates made him the primary suspect in Sarah's kidnapping. The investigation team began building a comprehensive case against Walsh. His lies about his whereabouts, his access to the Whitmore property, and his presence during the captivity period created a compelling circumstantial case. However, Sullivan knew they needed more evidence to prove Walsh was Mr. J. The diary entries provided victim testimony, but physical evidence linking Walsh directly to the crimes was essential for a conviction. "We need to search Walsh's current residence and any property he's owned since 1996, Sullivan told the task force. "If he's kept trophies or evidence, we need to find it." The investigation had identified a prime suspect, but many questions remained unanswered. What happened to Sarah and Amy after September 1996? Were there other victims? And most importantly, was there any chance either girl was still alive after 16 years? The web of deception. The search warrant for Jeremy Walsh's residence was approved within 6 hours. Detective Sullivan led a team of 8 investigators to Walsh's modest 2-story house on Elm Street at dawn. His wife Patricia answered the door, clearly confused about the police presence. "Mrs. Walsh, we have a warrant to search your home in connection with an ongoing investigation," Sullivan explained. "Your husband was arrested yesterday regarding the Sarah Hawkins case." Patricia Walsh's face went pale. "Sarah Hawkins? The girl who disappeared years ago? Jeremy said he barely knew about that case." Saidi, crime scene specialists immediately began processing Walsh's basement, garage, and any storage areas. Meanwhile, Sullivan interviewed Patricia Walsh about her husband's behavior and activities over the years. "Has Jeremy ever mentioned the Whitmore farmhouse or Harold Whitmore?" Sullivan asked. "He did odd jobs for various people when we were younger," Patricia said. "But he never talked about specific places or people he worked for." Detective Martinez questioned Patricia about Walsh's whereabouts during August and September 1996. The couple had been dating then but not yet living together. "Jeremy was weird that summer," Patricia recalled. "He said he was working a lot, but he never seemed to have much money. Sometimes he'd disappear for days and claim he was doing construction work out of town." Sullivan made careful notes. Walsh's girlfriend had noticed unusual behavior during the exact period when Sarah and Amy were being held captive. In Walsh's basement, crime scene specialist David Kim discovered a locked storage cabinet. The contents included items that had no apparent connection to Walsh's normal life: children's clothing in various sizes, newspaper clippings about missing children, and detailed maps of rural Missouri marked with red X's. "Detective, you need to see this," Kim called out. He'd found a photo album hidden behind the locked cabinet. The album contained pictures of young girls, most appearing to be school photos or candid shots taken from a distance. Sullivan examined the photographs carefully. Sarah Hawkins's school photo from 1995 was included, along with photos of at least 12 other girls. Amy Chen's photo was also there, confirming Walsh's connection to both victims. "This is a predator's collection," Sullivan said grimly. "He's been targeting children for years." Kim continued searching and found a manila folder containing detailed personal information about various children: home addresses, school schedules, family members' names, and daily routines. The level of surveillance indicated months of preparation for each potential kidnapping. "Jeremy Walsh isn't just connected to Sarah's case," Sullivan told her task force. "We're looking at a serial predator who's been operating for decades." She immediately contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. The scope of evidence suggested Walsh might be connected to missing children cases across multiple states. FBI Special Agent Rachel Torres arrived that afternoon to review the evidence. Her experience with serial predators provided valuable insight into Walsh's methods. "This collection shows sophisticated planning and long-term commitment to criminal activity," Torres observed. "The geographic spread of these children suggests he was willing to travel significant distances for victims." Torres noted that several of the photographs showed children from Kansas City, St. Louis, and other Missouri cities. Cross-referencing these photos with missing persons databases might reveal additional victims. Meanwhile, Detective Rodriguez was investigating Walsh's employment history more thoroughly. Walsh had worked for various construction companies between 1994 and 2001, often in temporary positions that required travel throughout Missouri and Arkansas. His job history perfectly explains how he could access victims in different cities, Rodriguez reported. Construction work gave him legitimate reasons to be in unfamiliar neighborhoods where he could conduct surveillance. Sullivan decided to re-interview Patricia Walsh with this new information. She wanted to understand how much Walsh's wife knew about his activities. "Mrs. Walsh, we found photographs of children in your husband's possession. Did you ever see these pictures, or wonder why he had them?" Patricia appeared genuinely shocked. "I never saw any pictures like that. Jeremy kept certain areas of the basement locked and said it was work stuff I shouldn't bother with. Did he ever bring strange items home? Children's clothing, toys, anything unusual?" Patricia thought carefully. "There were times when he'd come home with random stuff and put it in storage. He said he found things at construction sites or bought items at garage sales. I never looked closely at what he kept." Sullivan showed Patricia some of the children's clothing found in Walsh's storage cabinet. Patricia identified several items as things she'd seen Walsh bring home over the years. "He told me he was buying stuff to donate to charity," Patricia said. "I never questioned it because it seemed like a nice thing to do." The investigation team realized Patricia Walsh had unknowingly provided cover for her husband's criminal activity. Her trust in his explanations had allowed Walsh to maintain his collection of victim-related items without suspicion. Agent Torres began coordinating with law enforcement agencies in other states to check for unsolved missing children cases that matched Walsh's travel patterns. The preliminary results were disturbing. "We've identified 8 possible additional victims across Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma," Torres reported. The timeframes coincide with Jeremy Walsh's known work locations. Sullivan contacted the families of these potential victims to inform them about the investigation. Each conversation was heartbreaking, as parents who had lived with uncertainty for years suddenly faced the possibility of answers. The most promising lead came from Little Rock, Arkansas. In June 1998, 11-year-old Michelle Torres had disappeared while walking to a friend's house. The investigating detective, now retired, remembered that construction workers had been renovating buildings in Michelle's neighborhood that week. Agent Torres obtained the construction company records from 1998. Jeremy Walsh had been employed by Morrison Construction during the exact time frame of Michelle's disappearance. His work assignment placed him within 2 blocks of where Michelle was last seen. "This establishes a clear pattern," Torres told Sullivan. Walsh used his legitimate work assignments to identify and access victims in different cities. Back in Springfield, the search of Walsh's property continued yielding evidence. Crime scene specialists found a second storage area behind a false wall in his garage. This space contained more disturbing items: restraints, locks, and what appeared to be construction materials for building confined spaces. Kim also discovered detailed drawings that showed floor plans for basement modifications. The sketches depicted ways to soundproof rooms and install locks that couldn't be opened from the inside. "These drawings matched the modifications someone made to the Whitmore farmhouse basement," Kim reported. Walsh planned and executed the construction necessary to hold victims captive. Sullivan realized Walsh's construction skills had enabled his criminal activities. He knew how to modify buildings to create prison-like conditions while making them appear normal from the outside. The investigation expanded to include properties Walsh had access to throughout his career. Construction records showed he'd worked on dozens of rural properties, abandoned buildings, and isolated structures that could potentially serve as holding locations. "We need to check every property where Walsh worked between 1994 and 2005, Sullivan directed her team. "If he held multiple victims over the years, there might be additional crime scenes." Detective Martinez coordinated with county sheriffs across Missouri to examine properties on Walsh's work history list. The process was time-consuming, but several locations showed signs of suspicious modifications similar to those found at the Whitmore farmhouse. An abandoned warehouse in Joplin, Missouri, where Walsh had worked in 1999, contained a basement room with new locks and soundproofing materials. The modifications appeared recent despite the building being vacant since 2001. A farmhouse near Lebanon, Missouri, showed evidence of basement renovations that didn't match the building's original construction. Walsh had performed maintenance work there in 2000 for an elderly owner who died in 2003. "We're finding a network of locations Walsh could have used to hold victims," Sullivan told Agent Torres. "This wasn't random. He was systematically creating an infrastructure for kidnapping and imprisonment." The scope of Walsh's criminal enterprise was becoming clear. Over more than a decade, he had identified properties, planned modifications, and created multiple locations where he could hold victims without detection. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of evidence from Walsh's home provided additional connections to the original crimes. Hair samples found in his storage cabinet matched Sarah Hawkins' DNA profile from items in her family home. Fiber analysis connected clothing found in Walsh's possession to the yellow T-shirt discovered at the Whitmore farmhouse. The shirt had been purchased in Jefferson City in July 1996, the same city where Amy Chen lived before her disappearance. "We can now place both victims in direct contact with evidence from Walsh's possession," forensic specialist Maria Santos reported. "This provides physical proof linking him to their kidnappings." Sullivan prepared for Walsh's formal interrogation with Agent Torres. The evidence was overwhelming, but she wanted to obtain a confession that would provide details about what happened to Sarah, Amy, and potentially other victims. Walsh had remained silent since requesting a lawyer, but the mounting evidence pressure might convince him to cooperate. His attorney, public defender Michael Chen, reviewed the evidence and advised Walsh about his limited options. Jeremy, the prosecution has physical evidence, witness testimony, and documented proof of your access to multiple crime scenes, Chen explained. Your best option might be to provide information about the victims in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Walsh finally agreed to meet with investigators, but only with his attorney present. The formal interview took place at Springfield Police Department with Sullivan, Torres, and Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Park present. Jeremy, we know you held Sarah Hawkins and Amy Chen at the Whitmore farmhouse in 1996, Sullivan began. We have Sarah's diary describing her captivity and physical evidence linking you to both victims. Tebey. Walsh stared at the table without responding initially. Then he looked up at his attorney, who nodded encouragingly. I want to know what kind of deal you're offering, Walsh said quietly. Assistant District Attorney Park had prepared for this moment. If you provide complete and truthful information about all victims and help us locate any remains, we'll recommend life imprisonment without parole instead of seeking the death penalty. Walsh considered the offer for several minutes. His attorney whispered advice about the benefits of cooperation versus the risks of continuing to remain silent. I need guarantees, Walsh finally said. If I tell you what happened, I want the death penalty completely off the table. Park agreed to formalize the arrangement. Walsh would provide detailed information about his crimes in exchange for a life sentence. The agreement required him to be completely truthful and assist in locating any victims or evidence. Where are Sarah Hawkins and Amy Chen now? Sullivan asked once the plea agreement was signed. Walsh's response changed everything about the investigation. They're both dead. I buried them on the Whitmore property in September 1996. But there are others you don't know about yet. The revelation that both victims were deceased was devastating, but Walsh's admission of additional victims expanded the scope of the investigation far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Sullivan and her team prepared for the grim task of recovering remains while simultaneously investigating what could be one of Missouri's most prolific serial kidnapping cases. Unraveling the truth. Jeremy Walsh's confession session continued for 6 hours with multiple breaks. Detective Sullivan, Agent Torres, and ADA Park documented every detail as Walsh revealed the scope of his crimes spanning nearly 15 years. I started watching kids in 1994, Walsh admitted. I never planned to hurt anyone initially. I just liked observing them, learning their routines. Walsh described how his construction work provided perfect cover for surveillance. He could spend weeks in different neighborhoods, noting which children walked alone, which families had limited supervision, and which routes offered opportunities for abduction. Sarah Hawkins wasn't my first victim, Walsh continued. I took a girl named Rebecca Martinez from Kansas City in March 1996. She was at the farmhouse for 2 months before Sarah arrived. Sullivan felt sick as she realized Walsh had been holding multiple victims simultaneously. The diary reference to the girl upstairs wasn't Amy Chen. It was Rebecca Martinez. Where is Rebecca now? Torres asked. Dead, buried with the others behind the old barn at Whitmore's place. Walsh explained that he typically held victims for 2 to 4 months before killing them. The length of captivity depended on how quickly their disappearances generated media attention and police investigation pressure. I kept them in different locations so they couldn't communicate or plan escapes together, Walsh said. Sarah was in the basement. Amy was in a shed I modified behind the house. Rebecca was in an upstairs bedroom with boarded windows. The systematic nature of Walsh's operation became clear as he described his methods. He rotated victims between different holding areas, provided minimal food to keep them weak, and used psychological intimidation to prevent escape attempts. The Whitmore farmhouse was perfect because old Harold trusted me completely. I had keys to every building and could come and go without suspicion. Sullivan asked about Harold Whitmore's knowledge of the crimes. Walsh insisted the elderly man never knew victims were being held on his property. Harold was nearly blind and barely left his main house. The farm covered 40 acres with buildings scattered across the property. I made sure he never went near the areas where I kept the girls, Walsh's confession revealed he had killed 8 children between 1996 and 2004. After Harold Whitmore died in 2003, Walsh lost access to his primary holding location and reduced his criminal activity. I tried using other places, but nowhere worked as well as the farm. Too many neighbors, too much risk of discovery. Agent Torres pressed Walsh for details about each victim. The names and dates painted a horrific picture of systematic predation. Rebecca Martinez, age 10, Kansas City. March to May, 1996. Sarah Hawkins, age 12, Springfield, August to September 1996. Amy Chen, age 13, Jefferson City, July to September 1996. Michelle Torres, age 11, Little Rock, June to August 1998. David Kim, age 9, Tulsa, September to November 1999. Lisa Williams, age 12, St. Louis, May to July 2001. Jennifer Park, age 10, Oklahoma City, March to June 2002. Amanda Foster, age 11, Columbia, August to October 2004. All 8 are buried at the Whitmore property, Walsh confirmed. I can show you exactly where if you want to recover the remains. Sullivan coordinated with the state police and FBI to organize the largest evidence recovery operation in Missouri history. The Whitmore farmhouse property would require systematic excavation, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. Walsh also revealed details about his victim selection process. He targeted children from working-class families who walked alone regularly and lived in neighborhoods without extensive security measures. I spent months watching each kid before taking them. I knew their schedules, their families' routines, when they'd be vulnerable. The construction work gave Walsh access to rural properties, where he could modify buildings for holding victims. He estimated he had prepared holding facilities at more than 20 locations across Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Most of the places I never used, but I wanted options in case something went wrong with my primary location. Torres asked about Walsh's psychological motivation for the crimes. Walsh struggled to provide coherent explanations beyond saying he enjoyed the control and power over his victims. I liked knowing they depended on me completely for everything. Food, water, even basic survival. It made me feel important. The confession session concluded with Walsh agreeing to accompany investigators to the Whitmore property to identify burial locations. The recovery operation would begin the following morning with specialized forensic teams. Sullivan called a press conference that evening to inform the public about the developments. The revelation of 8 additional victims transformed a missing child case into one of Missouri's most significant serial murder investigations. We have credible information about the locations of multiple victims, Sullivan announced. Recovery operations will begin tomorrow at the Whitmore farmhouse property. The news generated intense media attention and overwhelming response from families of missing children across the region. Sullivan's phone rang continuously with calls from parents hoping their missing children might be among Walsh's victims. That night, Sullivan visited Linda and Richard Hawkins to inform them personally about Sarah's fate. The conversation was heartbreaking as she explained that Sarah had been murdered 16 years ago. "At least we finally know what happened to her," Linda said through tears. "We can have closure and give Sarah a proper burial." Richard Hawkins asked if Sarah had suffered during her captivity. Sullivan shared selected portions of the diary that showed Sarah's resilience and hope, while avoiding the more traumatic details. "Sarah never stopped believing she would see you again," Sullivan told them. "Her diary shows how much she loved and missed her family." The Hawkins family agreed to cooperate with the media coverage to help other families of missing children. Their strength in the face of devastating news provided inspiration for the continuing investigation. Early the next morning, the recovery operation began at the Whitmore property. Crime scene specialists, forensic anthropologists, and FBI evidence teams systematically searched the area Walsh had identified as the burial ground. Ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies consistent with grave sites in the location Walsh described. Cadaver dogs confirmed the presence of human remains at multiple points behind the old barn. The excavation process was methodical and respectful. Each potential grave site was carefully examined, photographed, and documented before any remains were removed. Within 6 hours, the teams had located the first set of remains. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Sarah Martinez confirmed they were consistent with a child aged 10 to 12 years old. The skeletal remains are relatively well preserved due to the soil conditions, Dr. Martinez reported. We should be able to establish positive identification through dental records. By the end of the first day, investigators had located remains at 3 separate burial sites. The recovery process would continue for several days as teams systematically examined the entire area Walsh had designated. Sullivan coordinated with law enforcement agencies in multiple states to obtain dental records and DNA samples for victim identification. The families of missing children waited anxiously for confirmation about whether their loved ones were among Walsh's victims. The investigation had evolved from a single missing child case into a massive forensic recovery operation. Sullivan realized this was only the beginning of a lengthy process to identify victims, notify families, and pursue justice for 8 murdered children. Walsh's cooperation with the recovery efforts provided some measure of closure for families, but the emotional impact of discovering the remains would reverberate through affected communities for years to come. The excavation. The forensic recovery operation at the Whitmore property entered its 3rd day under overcast skies. Dr. Sarah Martinez supervised teams working at 6 excavation sites where ground-penetrating radar had detected buried remains. Each site was processed with archaeological precision to preserve evidence and maintain dignity for the victims. Jeremy Walsh accompanied investigators to each location, providing detailed descriptions of how he had buried his victims. His matter-of-fact descriptions of the crimes contrasted sharply with the grief visible among family members who had gathered at the property perimeter. "I dug the graves at night using construction equipment I borrowed from job sites," Walsh explained to Detective Sullivan. Each grave was about 6 feet deep to prevent animals from disturbing the remains. Crime scene specialist David Kim documented Walsh's statements, while forensic teams carefully removed soil from around the first complete set of remains. The skeleton appeared to be that of a child approximately 10 years old, consistent with Rebecca Martinez's description. Dr. Martinez examined the remains in situ before authorizing their removal. The position and burial depth suggest these remains have been undisturbed since initial burial. We should have excellent preservation of evidence. FBI forensic odontologist Dr. Michael Chen arrived that morning with dental records from all 8 suspected victims. Comparing dental remains to childhood records would provide definitive identification within days. The first set of remains shows distinctive dental work consistent with Rebecca Martinez's records, Dr. Chen reported after initial examination. "We'll need laboratory confirmation, but this appears to be our first positive identification." Meanwhile, Agent Torres coordinated with victim families who had traveled to Missouri hoping for closure. The Martinez family from Kansas City waited in a hotel, supported by victim advocates and grief counselors. "Mrs. Martinez, the remains we've recovered may be Rebecca," Torres informed her gently. "We'll have definitive confirmation within 48 hours through dental record comparison." Carmen Martinez had spent 16 years wondering what happened to her daughter. The confirmation that Rebecca was dead provided painful closure to years of uncertainty. "I always feared this day would come," she said quietly. "But knowing is better than wondering forever." The second excavation site yielded remains that appeared significantly smaller, consistent with a younger child. Walsh identified this burial location as David Kim from Tulsa, who had been 9 years old when kidnapped in 1999. David was the youngest victim, Walsh told investigators. "He cried constantly for his parents. I couldn't risk the noise attracting attention." Dr. Martinez noted that these remains showed evidence of trauma consistent with blunt force injury to the skull. The forensic evidence supported Walsh's confession that he had killed victims when they became too difficult to control. By afternoon, teams had recovered remains from 4 burial sites. Each excavation revealed similar patterns: shallow graves, remains of children aged 9 to 13, and evidence of violent death. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with media relations as news crews gathered along the property boundaries. The story had attracted national attention as one of the largest child murder investigations in Missouri history. "We're asking media to respect the dignity of this process," Rodriguez announced. "These children deserve our reverence as we work to return them to their families." The third day's most significant discovery came from the site Walsh identified as Sarah Hawkins' burial location. The remains were found with fragments of clothing and a small piece of jewelry that Linda Hawkins immediately recognized as Sarah's favorite bracelet. "That's definitely Sarah's bracelet," Linda confirmed through tears. "I bought it for her 10th birthday. She wore it every single day." Preliminary examination suggested these remains had been buried for approximately 16 years, consistent with Sarah's September 1996 disappearance timeline. Formal identification would require dental record comparison, but circumstantial evidence strongly indicated these were Sarah's remains. Sullivan accompanied the Hawkins family as they viewed the excavation site from a respectful distance. The moment represented the end of 16 years of hoping Sarah might return home alive. "She's coming home now," Richard Hawkins said quietly. "Finally, our little girl is coming home." The emotional impact on investigators and families intensified as each burial site revealed another murdered child. Victim advocates worked continuously to support affected families, while crime scene teams maintained their professional focus on evidence recovery. Dr. Martinez's team processed each set of remains according to strict forensic protocols. Every bone fragment, clothing remnant, and associated evidence was cataloged for eventual analysis and potential prosecution use. "We're treating each burial site as an individual crime scene," Dr. Martinez explained. "The evidence we collect here will be crucial for understanding exactly how these children died." Walsh continued providing information about his methods and timeline for each murder. His detailed confessions helped investigators understand the progression of his crimes and identify patterns that might reveal additional victims. "After I killed them, I wrapped the bodies in construction tarps and buried them the same night," Walsh described mechanically. "I always worked alone and never told anyone what I was doing." Agent Torres documented Walsh's statements while analyzing them for psychological insights into his criminal behavior. Understanding Walsh's methodology might help solve similar cases in other jurisdictions. The fourth day of excavation yielded remains from the final burial sites. Dr. Chen confirmed positive identification of Amy Chen through distinctive dental work, providing closure for her family from Jefferson City. Amy's parents never stopped searching for her, Torres informed the excavation team. They organized volunteer search groups for years, always believing she might be found alive. The systematic recovery of all 8 victims represented unprecedented success in resolving multiple cold cases simultaneously. However, the emotional toll on everyone involved was enormous. Sullivan convened daily briefings to update all participating agencies on progress and coordinate next steps. The investigation had expanded beyond recovery to include detailed analysis of evidence that might reveal additional crimes. Walsh has admitted to 8 murders, but his construction work history suggests he had access to dozens of potential holding locations, Sullivan told the task force. "We need to investigate whether there are more victims we haven't identified." Crime scene teams completed evidence recovery after 5 days of intensive work. 8 sets of remains had been recovered and transported to the State Forensic Laboratory for detailed analysis. Dr. Martinez began the lengthy process of examining each set of remains for evidence of cause of death, time of burial, and any additional forensic details that might be relevant for prosecution. "Each victim will receive individual forensic examination," she assured affected families. "We'll determine exactly what happened to each child and document everything thoroughly." The excavation phase had concluded successfully, but the investigation was far from over. Forensic analysis, victim identification confirmation, and preparation for trial would require months of additional work. Walsh's cooperation had enabled the recovery of all 8 victims he confessed to murdering. However, investigators remained concerned that additional victims might exist at locations Walsh hadn't disclosed. The community response to the discoveries was overwhelming. Vigils were held for each identified victim, and memorial funds were established to support their families during the difficult grieving process. Sullivan reflected on the magnitude of what they had uncovered. A single anonymous call about lights in an abandoned house had led to solving 8 murder cases and providing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. The recovery operation had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, but the real work of seeking justice for 8 murdered children was just beginning. The forensic analysis. The Missouri State Crime Laboratory processed evidence from the Whitmore property excavation with unprecedented priority. Dr. Sarah Martinez supervised teams working around the clock to analyze remains and associated evidence from 8 burial sites. Each victim's remains underwent comprehensive forensic examination, including cause of death determination, time since death analysis, and trauma pattern documentation. The findings painted a disturbing picture of Walsh's systematic approach to murder. All 8 victims show evidence of blunt force trauma to the head, Dr. Martinez reported to Detective Sullivan. The injury patterns are consistent with repeated strikes from a heavy object, likely a hammer or similar construction tool. Forensic pathologist Dr. James Wong determined that Walsh had killed his victims through methodical beatings rather than single violent acts. The pattern suggested he murdered children when they became too difficult to control, or when investigative pressure made continued captivity too risky. The trauma patterns indicate the victims were struck multiple times over several minutes, Dr. Wong explained. This wasn't impulsive violence. It was deliberate and calculated murder. DNA analysis confirmed the identity of all 8 victims through comparison with family samples. Rebecca Martinez, Sarah Hawkins, Amy Chen, Michelle Torres, David Kim, Lisa Williams, Jennifer Park, and Amanda Foster had all been positively identified. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Michael Chen documented evidence of prolonged malnutrition in several victims, consistent with Walsh's confession that he provided minimal food during captivity periods. The bone density analysis shows these children were severely undernourished during the months before their deaths, Dr. Chen reported. This supports witness testimony about Walsh's methods of control through food deprivation. Crime scene specialist David Kim analyzed clothing fragments and personal items found with each victim. Many items matched missing persons reports filed years earlier, providing additional confirmation of victim identities. The yellow T-shirt found at the original crime scene was definitively linked to Amy Chen through fabric analysis and her mother's identification. The shirt had been purchased 3 days before Amy's disappearance, suggesting Walsh had provided it during her captivity. We now have physical evidence linking Walsh to each victim through clothing, personal items, or burial methods, Kim reported. The forensic case against him is overwhelming. Meanwhile, Agent Torres continued investigating whether additional victims might exist beyond the 8 Walsh had confessed to murdering. Analysis of his work records revealed dozens of properties where he could have held victims. Construction company payroll records showed Walsh had worked in 12 different cities across Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma between 1994 and 2005. Each location represented potential crime scenes that required investigation. Walsh's travel pattern coincides with unexplained disappearances of children in at least 6 additional cities, Torres reported. We're coordinating with local law enforcement to investigate these connections. The most promising lead involved the disappearance of 10-year-old Marcus Johnson from Fayetteville, Arkansas, in April 2000. Walsh had worked on a shopping center renovation project in Fayetteville during that exact time frame. Detective Sullivan traveled to Arkansas to review the Johnson case file with Fayetteville Police Detective Robert Harrison. Marcus had vanished while walking home from school, following a pattern similar to Walsh's confirmed victims. Marcus disappeared on April 12, 2000, Harrison explained. We never found any trace of him despite extensive searches and investigation. Construction records confirmed Walsh had been working within 2 miles of Marcus's school during April 2000. His timesheets showed he was in Fayetteville from April 8th through April 20th, covering the date of Marcus's disappearance. This fits Walsh's established pattern perfectly, Sullivan observed. Temporary construction work providing access to potential victims in unfamiliar communities. Harrison agreed to reopen the Marcus Johnson investigation as a potential Walsh victim case. Ground-penetrating radar would be used to search construction sites, where Walsh had worked in 2000. Back in Missouri, forensic accountant Lisa Park analyzed Walsh's financial records to understand how he funded his criminal activities. The analysis revealed he had maintained multiple bank accounts and safety deposit boxes across several states. Walsh kept detailed financial records of his construction work and personal expenses, Park reported. But there are significant cash expenditures that don't correspond to any legitimate activities. Say, the unaccounted cash had been used to purchase materials for modifying holding locations, transportation costs for victim surveillance, and rental payments for storage facilities where Walsh kept victim-related items. Safety deposit box records revealed Walsh had maintained boxes in Kansas City, Little Rock, and Oklahoma City during his most active criminal period. The boxes contained additional photographs of potential victims and detailed surveillance notes. This evidence shows Walsh was planning potential kidnappings months in advance, Sullivan told her task force. His criminal operation was far more sophisticated than we initially realized. FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Rachel Chen studied Walsh's victim selection patterns and methods to develop a psychological profile for potential prosecution use. Walsh targeted children who fit specific criteria, ages 9 to 13, limited family supervision, predictable daily routines, and residents in neighborhoods with minimal security, Dr. Chen reported. The psychological analysis revealed Walsh had conducted extensive surveillance of potential victims before acting. He typically watched children for 4 to 6 weeks, learning their schedules and identifying opportunities for abduction. This level of planning and patience indicates Walsh was a highly organized predator who prioritized avoiding capture over immediate gratification, Dr. Chen explained. The forensic evidence supported Walsh's confession, while revealing additional details about his criminal methodology. Prosecutors began preparing for trial with the most comprehensive evidence package in Missouri criminal history. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Park coordinated with prosecutors in Arkansas and Oklahoma, who were investigating potential Walsh victim cases in their jurisdictions. A coordinated prosecution strategy would ensure Walsh faced justice for all his crimes. We have physical evidence, confession testimony, and forensic proof linking Walsh to 8 murders in Missouri, Park announced. Additional charges are likely as we investigate cases in other states. The forensic analysis phase had provided definitive proof of Walsh's guilt, while revealing the full scope of his criminal enterprise. However, investigators remained concerned about potential additional victims who hadn't been identified. Dr. Martinez completed her analysis of all 8 victims with detailed reports documenting cause of death, time of burial, and evidence of prolonged captivity. Each report would serve as crucial evidence in the prosecution case. These children endured months of imprisonment and psychological torture before being murdered, Dr. Martinez concluded. The forensic evidence shows systematic abuse designed to maintain control while avoiding detection. The completion of forensic analysis marked another milestone in the investigation, but Sullivan knew the most challenging phase lay ahead, presenting this evidence in court and ensuring Walsh received appropriate punishment for his crimes. Family members of all 8 victims had been briefed on the forensic findings. While the details were disturbing, parents expressed gratitude for finally understanding what their children had endured. "Knowing the truth is painful but necessary," said Carmen Martinez, Rebecca's mother. "Now we can focus on seeking justice for our children." The forensic evidence had transformed Jeremy Walsh from a suspect into a convicted serial killer facing multiple life sentences or potential execution. The strength of the evidence made his conviction virtually certain. The trial preparation assistant district attorney Jennifer Park assembled the largest prosecution team in Springfield's history to handle the Jeremy Walsh case. The complexity of prosecuting 8 murders simultaneously required specialized expertise in forensic evidence, victim testimony, and capital punishment law. Park recruited experienced prosecutor David Chen from the Attorney General's office to serve as co-lead prosecutor. Chen had handled multiple death penalty cases and understood the intricate legal requirements for capital murder prosecution. This case will set precedents for how we prosecute serial killers in Missouri, Chen told the prosecution team. Every aspect of our preparation must be flawless. The evidence against Walsh filled 17 filing cabinets and required a dedicated conference room for organization. Crime scene photographs, forensic reports, victim identification documents, and confession transcripts created an overwhelming documentation challenge. Legal analyst Sarah Rodriguez coordinated the evidence organization using specialized database software designed for complex criminal cases. Each piece of evidence was cataloged, cross-referenced, and linked to specific charges against Walsh. We have over 2,000 individual pieces of evidence spanning 11 years of criminal activity, Rodriguez reported. Organization and presentation will be crucial for jury comprehension. Defense attorney Michael Chen faced the nearly impossible task of defending Walsh against overwhelming evidence. His strategy focused on challenging the death penalty rather than disputing Walsh's guilt. "My client has confessed to these crimes and cooperated fully with law enforcement," Chen announced. "Our focus will be on presenting mitigating factors that argue against execution." The defense team planned to argue that Walsh's cooperation in recovering victims' remains demonstrated remorse and should warrant life imprisonment instead of death. However, the systematic nature of his crimes made mitigation arguments extremely difficult. Judge Patricia Martinez was assigned to oversee the trial due to her experience with complex criminal cases. She immediately implemented special procedures to handle the unprecedented scope of evidence and media attention. This trial will require extensive pretrial hearings to resolve evidentiary issues before jury selection, Judge Martinez announced. "We must ensure a fair trial, despite the enormous public interest in this case." The victim impact phase of the trial would include testimony from 16 family members representing all 8 murdered children. Victim advocate Lisa Wong coordinated with families to prepare emotionally difficult but legally necessary testimony. Each family deserves the opportunity to tell the court about their child's life and the impact of their murder, Wong explained. These victim statements will be crucial during the penalty phase. Jury selection posed unique challenges due to extensive media coverage and community impact of the case. Court Administrator Tom Bradley coordinated with jury management to identify potential jurors who could fairly evaluate the evidence. Pretrial publicity surveys showed that 94% of potential jurors in Greene County had heard about the Walsh case. This necessitated bringing in jurors from other counties to ensure fairness. "We'll need to question hundreds of potential jurors to find 12 who can fairly consider both guilt and penalty phases," Judge Martinez determined. The prosecution team prepared detailed presentations for each murder charge, treating them as separate but related cases. This approach would allow jurors to consider individual circumstances while understanding the pattern of Walsh's criminal behavior. Dr. Sarah Martinez prepared to testify about forensic evidence for each victim. Her testimony would be crucial for establishing cause of death and connecting physical evidence to Walsh's confessions. "The forensic evidence tells a clear story about how these children died," Dr. Martinez explained during prosecution preparation meetings. "Juries need to understand both the scientific facts and the human tragedy they represent." FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Rachel Chen would testify about Walsh's psychological profile and victim selection methods. Her analysis would help jurors understand the calculated nature of Walsh's crimes. Walsh's criminal behavior shows sophisticated planning and complete disregard for human life, Dr. Chen prepared to testify. "This wasn't impulsive violence, it was systematic predation over more than a decade." The defense team faced significant challenges in preparing mitigating evidence. Walsh's cooperation with investigators provided their strongest argument against the death penalty, but his lack of remorse during confessions undermined claims of genuine rehabilitation. Defense investigator Amanda Foster interviewed Walsh's family members and former associates to identify potential mitigating factors from his background. The results provided little help for the defense case. Walsh's family describes him as always being different, but there's no evidence of childhood abuse or trauma that might explain his criminal behavior, Foster reported. Prosecutors Park and Chen prepared opening statements that would outline the scope of Walsh's crimes while remaining respectful to victim families and maintaining focus on legal requirements for conviction. We'll present evidence systematically, starting with victim disappearances and progressing through investigation, discovery, confession, and forensic proof, Park explained to her team. The prosecution strategy emphasized Walsh's methodical approach to crime, his abuse of legitimate employment for criminal purposes, and the prolonged suffering he inflicted on 8 innocent children. Pre-trial hearings began 6 months after Walsh's arrest. Judge Martinez ruled on numerous evidentiary motions while managing extensive media coverage and security concerns. The defense challenged the admissibility of Walsh's detailed confessions, arguing they were coerced despite his attorney's presence during questioning. Judge Martinez reviewed video recordings of all interrogation sessions. The defendant was properly advised of his rights, had legal counsel present, and voluntarily provided information in exchange for avoiding the death penalty, Judge Martinez ruled. The confessions are admissible. Prosecutors won most pre-trial motions, including permission to present evidence about Walsh's criminal methods, victim selection patterns, and the systematic nature of his crimes. The defense achieved limited success in excluding some crime scene photographs deemed too prejudicial, but the core evidence remained admissible for trial presentation. Security preparations for the trial included metal detectors, additional bailiffs, and coordination with state police for crowd control. The courthouse had never handled a case generating such intense public interest. Media coverage required special accommodations, including designated seating areas, pool camera arrangements, and daily briefing schedules to manage information flow while protecting trial integrity. Victim families worked with prosecutors to prepare impact statements that would personalize each murdered child for the jury. These statements balanced emotional impact with legal requirements for penalty phase testimony. We want the jury to understand who these children were as people, not just as victims, explained Carmen Martinez, Rebecca's mother. They had dreams, personalities, and families who loved them. The prosecution team completed trial preparation after 9 months of intensive work. The evidence was organized, witnesses were prepared, and legal strategies were finalized for what would become Missouri's most significant serial murder prosecution. Defense preparation focused primarily on the penalty phase, acknowledging that conviction was virtually certain given Walsh's confessions and the forensic evidence. The question would be whether Walsh received life imprisonment or execution. This trial will determine not just Jeremy Walsh's fate, but how Missouri handles serial killer prosecutions in the future, observed legal analyst Dr. James Park. The outcome will establish important precedents. As jury selection approached, the entire legal system prepared for a trial that would test Missouri's criminal justice capabilities while seeking justice for 8 murdered children and closure for their devastated families. The verdict and revelations. The Jeremy Walsh trial began on a crisp October morning in 2013, nearly 2 years after the initial discovery at the Whitmore farmhouse. Judge Patricia Martinez presided over a courtroom packed with victim families, media representatives, and law enforcement personnel who had worked tirelessly on the investigation. Jury selection had taken 3 weeks, with 347 potential jurors questioned, before identifying 12 who could fairly consider the evidence. The final jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 24 to 67, representing diverse professional and educational backgrounds. Prosecutor Jennifer Park delivered her opening statement with methodical precision, outlining how Walsh had systematically kidnapped, imprisoned, and murdered 8 children over an 11-year period. The evidence will show that Jeremy Walsh was not an impulsive killer, but a calculating predator who used his legitimate employment to identify vulnerable children and create sophisticated prison facilities where he held them captive for months before murdering them, Park told the jury. Defense attorney Michael Chen acknowledged his client's guilt, while arguing for life imprisonment instead of execution. Jeremy Walsh has confessed to these terrible crimes and helped law enforcement recover all 8 victims. While his actions are inexcusable, His cooperation demonstrates the possibility of redemption. The prosecution case unfolded over 6 weeks with testimony from 127 witnesses and presentation of 1,147 pieces of evidence. Detective Sullivan testified about the investigation. Dr. Sarah Martinez explained the forensic evidence, and FBI agent Torres described Walsh's criminal pattern. The most powerful testimony came from victim family members who described their children's personalities, dreams, and the devastating impact of their murders on surviving relatives. Linda Hawkins spoke about Sarah's love of art and her plans to become a teacher. Sarah drew pictures constantly and talked about helping other children learn. She never had the chance to fulfill those dreams because Jeremy Walsh stole her future. Carmen Martinez described Rebecca as a gifted student who loved reading and wanted to become a veterinarian. Rebecca rescued injured animals and nursed them back to health. She had such compassion for all living creatures. Walsh watched impassively as families described the children he had murdered. His lack of visible emotion contrasted sharply with the grief displayed by parents, siblings, and grandparents who had lost their loved ones. The forensic evidence presentation took 8 days, with Dr. Martinez explaining in detail how each child had died. The systematic nature of Walsh's violence became clear as injury patterns were analyzed and compared across all 8 victims. Each victim suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the head, delivered with enough force to cause immediate unconsciousness, followed by death. Dr. Martinez testified, "The consistency of the injury patterns indicates Mr. Walsh used the same method to kill all 8 children." Crime scene specialist David Kim presented evidence connecting Walsh to each crime scene through fibers, DNA, and personal items found in his possession. The physical evidence corroborated every aspect of Walsh's detailed confessions. The prosecution also presented evidence about additional potential victims Walsh might have murdered. Detective Rodriguez testified about suspicious disappearances in cities where Walsh had worked, suggesting the 8 confirmed murders might not represent the full scope of his crimes. Mr. Walsh's employment records show he was present in Little Rock when Michelle Torres disappeared, in Tulsa when David Kim vanished, and in Oklahoma City during Jennifer Park's abduction, Rodriguez explained to the jury. Defense attorney Chen cross-examined witnesses carefully, but couldn't effectively challenge the overwhelming evidence against his client. His strategy focused on humanizing Walsh and emphasizing his cooperation with investigators. Mr. Walsh could have remained silent and forced families to wonder forever about their children's fate, Chen argued. His decision to confess and help recover the remains shows he retained some capacity for human decency. However, recordings of Walsh's interrogations undermined the defense's portrayal of him as remorseful. His matter-of-fact descriptions of kidnapping and murdering children showed no emotional response to the suffering he had caused. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Walsh unexpectedly asked to testify on his own behalf against his attorney's advice. Judge Martinez allowed the testimony after confirming Walsh understood the risks of taking the stand. "I want the families to know I'm sorry for what I did to their children," Walsh said quietly. "I can't explain why I started taking kids or why I couldn't stop. Something was wrong with me, but that doesn't excuse what I did." Under cross-examination by Prosecutor Park, Walsh's testimony revealed additional disturbing details about his crimes. He admitted to enjoying the control he had over his victims and described killing them as a necessity to avoid capture. When the kids started causing problems or when police investigations got too close, I had to eliminate the evidence, Walsh testified coldly. His testimony eliminated any remaining sympathy jurors might have felt and reinforced the prosecution's argument that Walsh deserved the death penalty for his systematic crimes. The defense case lasted only 4 days, focusing primarily on Walsh's cooperation with investigators and expert testimony about his psychological condition. Dr. Michael Foster, a psychiatrist hired by the defense, testified that Walsh suffered from antisocial personality disorder but was legally sane. Mr. Walsh understood the nature of his actions and knew they were wrong, Dr. Foster admitted under prosecution cross-examination. His disorder explains his behavior but doesn't excuse it. Closing arguments began on a Friday morning in December 2013. Prosecutor Chen delivered a powerful summation, emphasizing the premeditated nature of Walsh's crimes and the prolonged suffering of his 8 victims. Jeremy Walsh didn't simply kill 8 children. He tortured them psychologically for months before murdering them. He stole not just their lives but their hope, their dreams, and their families' peace of mind. Defense attorney Chen made a final plea for life imprisonment, arguing that execution would not bring back the victims while Walsh's continued cooperation might help solve additional cases. Jeremy Walsh deserves severe punishment for his crimes, but killing him will not heal the wounds he has inflicted on these families and our community. Judge Martinez instructed the jury on the legal requirements for first-degree murder convictions and the standards for imposing the death penalty. The jury deliberated for 11 hours over 2 days before reaching their verdict. The courtroom was silent as jury foreman Richard Park read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant Jeremy Walsh guilty of murder in the first degree, on all 8 counts. Victim families wept with relief as the guilty verdicts were announced. After 17 years of uncertainty, they finally had legal acknowledgement that their children had been murdered and their killer had been held accountable. The penalty phase began immediately, with the same jury determining whether Walsh would receive life imprisonment or death sentences for his crimes. Additional victim impact testimony and expert witness presentations continued for another week. Dr. Rachel Chen testified about Walsh's psychological profile, emphasizing his lack of genuine remorse and the calculated nature of his criminal behavior. Mr. Walsh presents a continuing danger to society. His crimes were not impulsive acts, but the result of careful planning and complete disregard for human life. The jury deliberated the penalty decision for 14 hours before announcing their recommendation. For each of the 8 murder convictions, they recommended death sentences. Judge Martinez scheduled formal sentencing for January 2014, allowing time for pre-sentence investigations and final legal motions. Walsh would likely become one of the few inmates on Missouri's death row with multiple death sentences for serial murder. The verdict brought legal closure to the case, but emotional healing would take much longer for the affected families. Support groups were established to help parents, siblings, and extended family members cope with their losses. The trial gave us justice, but it can't give us back our children, reflected Linda Hawkins. We'll carry this pain forever, but at least we know Jeremy Walsh can never hurt another child. The investigation continued beyond the trial, as authorities pursued leads about potential additional victims. Walsh's cooperation had ended with his conviction, but his employment records and travel patterns suggested other children might have been murdered. Detective Sullivan received commendations for her leadership of the investigation, which had solved 8 cold cases and brought closure to families who had waited decades for answers. This case shows why we never give up on missing children investigations, Sullivan said. Even after 16 years, evidence can still be discovered and justice can still be served. The Walsh case became a model for multi-jurisdictional serial crime investigations, demonstrating how cooperation between agencies and methodical evidence analysis could solve complex cases spanning multiple states and many years. As the legal proceedings concluded, the focus shifted to memorializing the 8 young victims and supporting their families' ongoing healing process. Their deaths had not been forgotten, and their killer would face the ultimate punishment for his crimes against innocent children. Justice and remembrance. Judge Patricia Martinez delivered Jeremy Walsh's formal sentencing on January 15, 2014, in a courtroom filled with victim families, law enforcement personnel, and media representatives. The proceedings marked the culmination of a 2-year investigation and trial that had captivated the nation. Jeremy Walsh, you have been found guilty of 8 counts of murder in the first degree by a jury of your peers, Judge Martinez announced. The jury has recommended the death penalty for each count, and this court concurs with their recommendation. Walsh showed no emotion as he received 8 death sentences, making him one of only 3 inmates in Missouri history to receive multiple death penalties for serial murder. His execution date was scheduled for 2016, pending mandatory appeals through the state and federal court systems. The sentencing phase included final victim impact statements from family members who had waited 17 years for this moment of legal closure. Their words provided powerful testimony to the lasting impact of Walsh's crimes on surviving relatives. Richard Hawkins spoke on behalf of his murdered daughter, Sarah. Sarah would be 28 years old today. She might have been married, might have had children of her own. Jeremy Walsh didn't just kill our daughter. He murdered all the possibilities her life represented. Carmen Martinez described the ongoing impact of losing Rebecca. For 17 years, I've wondered if my daughter was alive somewhere, hoping she might come home. Now I know she's never coming home, but at least I know she's at peace. The formal sentencing concluded the legal proceedings, but the investigation's impact extended far beyond the courtroom. The Walsh case had prompted reforms in how law enforcement agencies coordinate multi-jurisdictional investigations of serial crimes. FBI Special Agent Rachel Torres was promoted to head a new unit focused on identifying and tracking potential serial predators who use legitimate employment to access victims across state lines. The unit would implement lessons learned from the Walsh investigation. Jeremy Walsh operated undetected for 11 years because he used construction work as cover for his crimes. Torres explained, "We're developing new protocols to identify similar patterns before they result in multiple victims." Detective Laura Sullivan received the Missouri Peace Officer Association's highest honor for her leadership in solving the cold cases. Her methodical approach and refusal to give up on missing children had provided closure to 8 families. "Every missing child deserves the same level of investigation and commitment we gave to Sarah Hawkins and the other victims," Sullivan said during the award ceremony. "We can never give up hope that answers exist." The Springfield Police Department established the Sarah Hawkins Cold Case Unit, dedicated to investigating unsolved disappearances of children using techniques developed during the Walsh investigation. The unit received funding to purchase specialized equipment for evidence analysis and crime scene processing. Officer Michael Chen, who had discovered the original evidence at the Whitmore farmhouse, was promoted to detective and assigned to the new Cold Case Unit. His thorough investigation of a routine patrol call had ultimately solved 8 murders. This case taught us that every piece of evidence matters, and every investigation deserves our complete attention, Chen reflected. You never know when a simple patrol call might break open a major case. The Whitmore farmhouse property was purchased by Greene County and converted into a memorial park honoring the 8 victims. Each child was remembered with a garden area and plaque describing their life and interests. The Sarah Hawkins Memorial Garden featured art supplies and books, reflecting her dream of becoming a teacher and helping other children learn. Visitors often left flowers and personal notes expressing sympathy for her family. Rebecca Martinez was remembered with a veterinary-themed garden containing information about animal rescue and care, honoring her compassion for injured creatures and her dream of becoming a veterinarian. Amy Chen's memorial focused on her academic achievements and love of reading, with a small library where visitors could leave books for local children in need of educational materials. The memorial park served multiple purposes, honoring the victims, providing a peaceful space for family members to remember their children, and educating the public about child safety and the importance of reporting suspicious activities. Linda and Richard Hawkins became advocates for missing children's families, working with law enforcement agencies to improve communication and support services during investigations. Their experience with the lengthy uncertainty surrounding Sarah's disappearance informed their advocacy efforts. "No family should have to wait 17 years for answers about their missing child," Linda Hawkins said during a conference on improving missing persons investigations. "We can do better at supporting families and maintaining hope during long investigations." The Walsh case also prompted legislative changes in Missouri regarding child protection and predator identification. New laws required enhanced background checks for construction workers and other professionals who have access to residential neighborhoods where children live. Construction industry associations implemented voluntary training programs to help workers identify and report suspicious behavior by colleagues who might be targeting children during work assignments. The case had international implications as well, with law enforcement agencies from Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia studying the investigation methods that had successfully identified and prosecuted Walsh for crimes spanning more than a decade. FBI training programs began using the Walsh case as a model for multi-jurisdictional investigations, emphasizing the importance of sharing information between agencies and maintaining detailed records of evidence and witness statements. As the legal appeals process began, Walsh remained on death row at the Potosi Correctional Center. His attorneys filed mandatory appeals challenging various aspects of the trial and sentencing, but legal experts predicted the appeals would be unsuccessful given the overwhelming evidence against him. The appeals process would likely take several years, during which Walsh would remain in solitary confinement 23 hours per day. His cooperation with the investigation had ended after his conviction, and he refused to provide additional information about potential victims. Investigators continued pursuing leads about possible additional victims in Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Several cold cases showed patterns similar to Walsh's confirmed crimes, but without his cooperation, proving connections would require extensive forensic work. The families of Walsh's 8 confirmed victims found different ways to honor their children's memories while coping with their ongoing grief. Some established scholarship funds, others supported child safety organizations, and many became advocates for improved missing persons investigations. Carmen Martinez created the Rebecca Martinez Foundation, which provided resources and support for families of missing children. The foundation offered counseling services, helped coordinate search efforts, and advocated for legislative changes to improve child protection. Rebecca's death can't be undone, but maybe we can prevent other families from experiencing what we've endured, Martinez explained during the foundation's launch ceremony. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the forensic anthropologist who had analyzed the victims' remains, used the case to advance research into identifying victims of prolonged captivity and abuse. Her work would help future investigators understand physical evidence patterns in similar cases. The Walsh investigation had demonstrated that cold cases could be solved even after many years if investigators maintained detailed records and remained open to new evidence. The case became a model for persistence in pursuing justice for victims and their families. As the community continued healing from the revelation of Walsh's crimes, the memory of his 8 young victims remained a powerful reminder of the importance of protecting children and supporting families during their darkest moments. The investigation that began with a simple patrol call about lights in an abandoned house had ultimately provided justice for 8 murdered children and closure for families who had waited decades for answers. Their children's lives had ended tragically, but their memories would live on through the positive changes their cases had inspired. The Jeremy Walsh case concluded as one of the most significant serial murder investigations in Missouri history, demonstrating that justice could prevail even after many years, and that victims' families deserved unwavering commitment from law enforcement agencies dedicated to finding the truth.